one. And we have Shay Trendle, pharmacist, presenting evaluation of crops and rotational options to support diversity in sugarcane farming systems in Northern Australia. Thank you, Shay.
Thank you. Right, so I'm here today to give an update on the progress of our GBRF funded innovation project. So this project is focused on multi-species cropping in the fallow, and we've heard from a few different people. It's obviously a hot topic at the moment in different regions. So we've been mucking around with multi-species for a few years now, and one thing that growers keep raising with us is the need for a suitable planter. So, you know, how do we plant all these different sized seeds cost effectively? Here we go. So the key purposes of our project, we've got two main purposes. First is to identify a cheap and easy way to use our existing equipment to plant our multi-species crops. Also, growers are not keen to need to work up the whole block to plant their fallow crops, so we're looking at zonal and minimum tillage options, as well as to try and identify what the actual benefits of these multi-species crops are. So there's a lot of feel-good emotions. Drive past and look at sunflowers in the field, and there's some anecdotal evidence that, you know, there are benefits there. But I suppose many other industries are identifying follow-on benefits. But the issue with sugarcane is, you know, is our 3 to 4 month fallow period really a long enough time to make a difference to a, you know, 5, 6, 7 year monoculture? So we got a few trials to look at that sort of aspect. And then, of course, what do we plant? What's going to have the biggest benefit? What's going to grow in our wet season? And what's going to grow through our trash blanket? Okay, so through the project and through discussions with growers who are keen on these multi-species cropping, we ended up buying, on the left, this yellow, it's a 5-hose outlet air seeder. And then on this side, we've got a little electric, like a spinner, a spreader. So we wanted to buy something that was cheap, it's not heavy, it's not bulky, and things that we could move from one implement to another implement. We didn't want anything that was fixed to one machine or to one farm. So we wanted it to be fairly transportable. Okay, so we then came up with this mix. So this is a 12 species mix. We wanted to get a range of different soil health options. That's why we've got such a big variety of our crops here. So you can see in the mix, we've tried to avoid anything we thought would cause a problem down the track. So there's no lab, there's no forage sorghum, there's none of those hard-seeded varieties that will become a weed, you know, in a year or two. You'll also notice there's no grass in that mix. So we wanted, you know, if we can spray over the top of this mix with something like a grass-selective herbicide, something like Burdekin, that would take out sugarcane, take out guinea grass, any other grass weed problems, and it wouldn't impact any of these crops. So later on you'll see why that's important. This is not a cheap mix. This is over $100 per hectare, so it's not a commercial viability here. So, and maybe it's a bit too heavy, so looking back we probably could have planted it more around that 20 kilos per hectare. But we did want that variety. That's why it costs so much, because there is so many different things there, and we really needed to test what was going to come up through a trash blanket, what was going to grow on different soil types, and how we would get our biggest, you know, soil health improvement. So I don't recommend you planting that every year. You'll go broke. So growers modified, you know, a number of different implements, which we'll go through in more detail. But all up, we had 21 hectares planted to that 12 species mix. And then while the growers had it set up, you know, they could see it was easy to use. They'd finished planting our mix. They went out and bought more seed. And so another 43 hectares was also planted with those seeders, which is definitely a positive. So start with the most exciting one, seeding behind the harvester. So most of you would know Rob Sluggett. Rob has a couple farms down at Camila. Usually he's at these conferences. He couldn't make it this year. He's also one of the directors of Pharmacist. So he's been banging on about, we've got to work out a way to seed behind the harvester for years now. So there was some wild ideas of hanging those, you know, that spreader off the elevator, or trying to mount it at the back of the elevator, you know, You can imagine the harvester driver's response. No. Some were a bit more colourful language, some not quite as polite, but definitely it was a no. So once we got that air seeder though, we could see there was some other alternatives. So this is Racecourse Project's harvester. This is Rob Muscat here, the driver, and that's Jess, one of our newbies, who's over there. You can talk to her tonight. So they ended up setting the air seeder up near the ladder where they climb up, and you know, it's safe out there, it's away from the elevator, away from haul-outs, and Rob actually had the seed in the cab with him, so he could just come out, refill it if needed, and off they'd go. But that hopper there could probably fit about 3 to 4 hectares of our 12 species mix. So it's not time consuming for him to constantly stop and fill it with seed. Then you can see the hoses coming down the side of the machine, and they go around to the back. So one of the issues was we were worried that it would get bashed around by the standing cane when it's cutting, you know, in the cane side there. But because of where it is up near that ladder, it's fairly safe and protected. You know, maybe if it was more sprawly cane, it might get hit. But also remembering this is a last cut ratoon, it's going into fallow. That's not going to be the biggest cane on your farm. So it's probably not going to really get too damaged. Okay, so those hoses come through the back of the machine to the bottom there, and these, you can see the 5 hoses. Does this thing work? Oh yeah. Here, there's one there, those 2 there, and these little silver things are just little spreader discs. So the seed comes down the hose, hits that, and it sort of disperses it a bit more. So we've got 2 behind the wheel tracks and then 3 going onto the beds. These guys are set up at 2.4 metre row spacings. So they're big beds there. Okay, here's some drone footage. And this is just, they can't see much of the seeds, but it's just showing you that nothing's changed. They haven't slowed down. It's just business as usual, off they go. When he needs to fill up with the seed, he just gets out and does it. So this is a seed. There's a control box that we've set up in the cab, so he can switch the machine on and off when he's turning around on headlands, or here when he's waiting for the haul-outs. So you'll be able to see when he switches it back on. See, and there's the seed coming out. So mainly we can see the large soybean seed here. A lot of the other seed is just tiny. You know, we won't be able to see it, but you know, trust me, it's there. So this is it coming up. So this was seeded and harvested after we'd had some rain. So it was fairly moist, and then obviously the wheel tracks were trafficked, and that seems to have really helped establishment in the wheel tracks. But you can see there's a bit coming up in the cane rows. So that cane will come up, and then you know they'll come through and spray it with Burdekin. So here we're starting to get worried now. There's a lot in the wheel tracks. You can see here, and then the beds are a little bit light on. Then we realised, because we had the 2 hoses at the wheel tracks, he'd go down the row, obviously he'd turn around, he'd come back down that row, so the wheel tracks are getting seeded twice. So obviously we've got to fix that up this year. We're going to move that hose across. And then also worried that, is the trash blanket too thick? Like they're on these 2.4 metre row spacing. It wasn't too horrible of a yield, like was it just too much of a trash blanket? But then, you know, a couple weeks later, it's all up. You can't really see where the row spacing is. You can see the old cane there. So obviously there's a bed going down that way, and it's all filled in. So really we just had to be that little bit more patient. It was all still coming. So this is another site behind the harvester. I'll just show you, it's a bit of a sequence. You can see the canes coming back, the crops coming up. See the dark cane there? It's all coming up. Now they've sprayed the cane now with the Burdekin. The cane sprayed out. That block had a lot of guinea grass as well, so it's all sprayed out, and the multi-species is really taken over. So the benefits, you know, you guys can see it. You can work out the benefits. We haven't had to work any soil up, and we've planted a fallow crop. It's got a full trash blanket. No trash has been disturbed. You know, all before the wet season, it's full trash blanket, no disruption. Your harvester driver's just planted your crop for you. It's simple, it's cheap, and it's easy. And so far it's worked. So, any questions, or can I move on from the harvester? He probably asked for one. Yep. Yeah, well, yeah, I reckon it is. Yep, it's helping and speeding it up. Yep, for sure.
How did you inoculate the seed?
Yeah,
and then sit it in the cab for hours?
Yeah, that was a job too. So, because we were there, it wasn't sitting in there for hours. So we mixed it up that morning.
So you were there actually mixing the seed, passing to him in the cab as well?
We mixed it in our shed in the morning, and there's like 4 different inoculants. We had to mix them, each one separate, put them all together, put the whole lot together, bag them up, and then bring them out that day. So yeah, you're true, that isn't a concern, that you don't want it sitting around all day.
So just with the inoculant question, did you check for nodulation and that? Because normally if the seed's then, I'm assuming it's sitting on top of the trash and the inoculant's then exposed to the hot sun, how did that go?
Well, it's protected, like it has got the trash blanket over it. But yeah, that's what we need to do now, is do our biomass samples. Because we actually need to go back and look at what's come up, like how much per sort of in a quadrat. So yeah, we'll have to look at nodulation.
Was there much nodulation on your... Was there very much nodulations on the legumes?
Well, they're still in. They're still growing, so we haven't really dug much up yet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we can come back. So moving on, this is a wavy disc here. Again, he set up his air seeder and it's coming down. Where is it? So here's the hose here, and the spreader disc is basically throwing it right onto the wavy discs. So they're just going to work it into the ground, and then he's got his roller to go over. So he's working 3 beds there, so he's not touching the wheel spacing. Remember that it had 5 outlets in that air seeder, so we have actually blocked off 2. So he's only got 3 hoses running, 1 to each row. So here's it, it's coming up here, still got the trash blanket in the wheel spacing, and it's taken off. Next up's a power harrow. Similar again. This guy didn't want, Alan, he didn't want the spreader disc. He just got the dropping the seed here out the hose. It's going to get a harrow, and he's working the bed that the tractor's straddling and then the 2 half beds. Then he comes back the other side and finishes off that half bed. So for this one, we blocked off 1 of the hoses. So each bed effectively is getting the 2 hose outlet. So this is not Alan, this is the neighbour down the road. He's come for a sticky beak. And that's something we've really noticed with this project, is that there's a lot of interest. People are hearing about multi-species, and we hear about what's happening overseas, and we hear about what's happening in other industries. And so there seems to be real genuine interest in the results. People coming and having a look. This is Alan here. See the crops taking off. And then, these are the text messages I get. He sends me this, the sunnies are out, it's looking good. So it's all exciting. Okay, so this one's a little bit different because this is actually getting seeded into some bare worked up soil. So the grower roughly forms up some beds, and then he comes through with this renovator and sort of does the final shape and form. And then in this case, he's also seeded. So we've got the hoses coming out in front of the machine, so the seed's getting pushed into the beds. So he's doing the same as the power harrow. He's got the 1 bed that the tractor's straddling, and then the 2 half beds. So we've got 2 hoses in the middle, 1 on each half bed, and then we got this little one. I can't see that side. There's a little one there that's is spreading wildly, just to go over wheel tracks and the bed. So this is us in there. Some guys freak out seeing this because it just looks wild. It's like a jungle. So when I was there looking at it, that's the feeling that I had, like, oh, God, this looks messy. Like, it's not like the 2 neat rows of soybean or that 1 neat row of sugarcane. It's something different that, you know, it's like a shift in mindset that's okay. That's what we want. So this grower is actually in the middle of changing row spacing. So he's going from 1.7 metre to 2.4. So this block has been well and truly worked. He's formed his rough beds. He's gone over with that bed renovator, formed them and spread the seed. And there's some drone footage here. So you can see the block, you know, it is hilly and it's sloping, and the beds are quite high. So having that adequate soil cover, you know, really was essential in this situation. So while it looks messy, it's really served its purpose before our wet season. So we had some trials a couple years back looking at sediment loss. I'll just show you this. So this side over here is just Jap millet, and it was supposed to be compared to soybean over here on beds. But, you know, as usually happens, it was too dry, then it was too wet. So the soybeans didn't get planted, but we thought while we had this here, it's a good opportunity to sort of do a bit of a comparison. So we tried to collect, which button am I pushing? Water samples. So, oh dear, go back. I don't remember pushing that many buttons. Yep. Back. Yeah, that one. So a lot of you would have seen these KP samplers. So this side here, this thing don't like me here. So that's a hole filled with water where we're sort of trying to collect the water sample to test, you know, what's in the runoff. And over the other side, you can see the hole's disappeared. It's totally filled with soil, and that happened constantly over that whole season. So then we thought, well, we shouldn't be worrying about water quality. Let's look at sediment loss. Let's push it once. So, you know, filtering out the soil that was in the water samples sort of roughly showed that where the bare fallow was, it's losing, you know, double the amount of soil as where we had a cover crop. And that's probably a very conservative figure, considering that it kept filling up, like we were missing samples in that bare fallow. So that's obviously a concern. And, you know, we talk about multi-species having all these soil health benefits, but I think one of the big benefits we've seen is this, you know, this cover and this stopping the sediment loss. Like Mick with his sloping ground, if he had, you know, his beds with the 2 rows of soybean, which, you know, really that's our industry best standard, really. Would it have had as much soil protection? I'd say probably not in that circumstance with those sort of hills. And maybe, you know, we need to think about, if we're going to plant soybean, also including something like the Jap millet with the soybean to provide that bit extra soil cover. Okay. All right, so issues. This one we already talked about. You know, we've got to think about this a bit better. But anyway, next time we're going to move the hose over so wheel tracks don't get double the amount of seed. So age of trash blanket. So Alan with his power harrow, he'd cut a block in July, ready for fallow. He'd cut another block in November. They were right next to each other. There was just a winch row in between. You know, sprayed them out at the relevant times and then planted them with that power harrow on the exact same day. And where the block had been cut early, it just took off out the ground. And even now, there's a big difference. I can see that early cut cane, you know, with that trash that's been allowed to settle, it's definitely producing quicker and more than the older cut, late cut. So whether that's to do with, you know, that fresh trash blankets being mineralised, slowing down growth, whether it's simply to do with the trash blankets wet and heavy, it's harder for the crop to get through, we don't know. Does that help explain what happened behind the harvester, where the wheel tracks were quicker than the beds? Possibly. Sorry. Possibly. And maybe, you know, there's plenty that we don't know. All right, I'm getting the wind up. Obviously, blocks with guinea grass, we can spray verdict over the top. Blocks with vines, we need to think about timing of planting, timing of termination, but that's with all fallow crops, not just with the multi-species. And you saw the amount of biomass that was in those blocks. These guys want to come back and minimum or zonal tillage, plant sugarcane. You know, that's, I think, going to be a bit of a headache we're going to deal with in the next few months. What's next? We've got John Fox, who's usually at this conference. I don't think he's here this year. He is actually going to modify his fertiliser box so he can plant some species in the inner rows while he's also fertilising the ratoons, which will be, I think, interesting and maybe a headache. And we've got some trial site data that we're still collecting. And yeah, generally continuing to support growers. We've got those machines there that obviously we'll get back out onto farm this year. Thank you. I think that's it.
Thank you, Shay. Any other questions, please?